Hey, everybody, I'm here with Natalya. I'm going to ask Natalya the same question I ask everybody, which is, what is it like to be you?
I mean, it's great. If you compare my life to a road, I can say that there have been some bumps, but I'm fine now, which is great, and I'm happy.
Good. I'm glad you got over the bumps. And then I think you have some questions for me.
Yes. Um, so feel free not to answer some of the questions if they're too personal or stupid.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think defines you as a sociopath?
For me, the defining trait as a sociopath is more that I have a personality disorder. And this has changed over time. I used to think that maybe sociopaths weren't part of the rest of the personality disordered people. You know, it was more just a question in my mind. And now I have kind of a certain belief that the thing that I have mostly is a personality disorder. And then the things that uh, characterize my personality disorder are consistent with sociopathy or antisocial personality disorder. So things like I have narcissism, but it's not a desire for the approval of others. So I think that kind of distinguishes me from kind of narcissistic personality disorder people who I think mostly are interested in where they kind of rank in terms of people, and not just that, but whether people acknowledge or admire them kind of for their good qualities. And I'm fine just staying in the shadow. In fact, I don't like uh generally don't like attention. It's funny because like when I'm a musician, I just had a gig last night. I got up on stage, and I'm like playing the song Shake Your Tail Feather, which is like shake your bum bum. So I'm like shaking my bum bum, doing all these things because I want to give people a good show, but it's not like I thrive off that, or I want or need that. I actually um don't usually even like interacting with too many people. Um, and certainly when I was growing up, my sister has her birthday's on the day after mine. And I always thought that was better. And my cousin had the birthday before. So we'd always have a shared three-part birthday celebration. And I liked that better. I didn't want it to be just my birthday party. I wanted to share it and be able to enjoy it, but also not be the focus of the attention. I didn't like people watching me. That's one trait, I guess, narcissism. Another trait is no empathy. I mean, I have cognitive empathy, but I don't really think I have effective empathy at all. I don't have what people would say a conscience. I don't really have any moral reasoning at all. I don't have any real sense of guilt about life. I don't experience that as an emotion. I don't have fear. I am like a chameleon. I just adapt naturally to the context that I'm in. And just like, I guess it's kind of people pleasing, but it's not really to get people's approval. It's mostly, again, to just kind of get the things that I want or need. And often it's just to stay off people's radar. It's because I don't
Mhm.
want to trigger, like a witch hunt or anything about me for like the lack of empathy or some of the other things that are true about me.
Um, do you feel that being a sociopath is a disability, or is it more positive and has more positive aspects?
So I think that there are things in, let's say, evolutionary science that are triggered depending on the circumstances. So one thing I know for sure, in California, where I live, we have big, big trees. The tallest tree is called the redwood. And then the biggest tree by volume is called the sequoia. And those trees are cousins of each other. They're related to each other. And I know the sequoia for sure, and I think the redwood tree too, is that the cone that the seeds are stored in, some of the cones are sealed in like a wax, and in order for the seeds to leave the cone and go into the earth, there has to be a fire to melt the wax, and then the cone will open up, and then it will release the seeds to go into the earth. And the thought is that that the baby tree cannot grow unless there's been a fire that's killed other older trees and made space for the baby tree. So this is why it happens. And I often think that for me, my my predisposition to psychopathy is kind of like this. Like it's in my genetics, but it needs something to trigger it, like a fire. And for me, there could have been various things, my experience as a very small baby, a newborn, where I had colic, a really bad um it makes babies cry. They hate it. And my parents said that I was crying like 23 hours a day, 23 and a half is what they say. And that they would just put me in a room to just cry by myself. And also, my mom, just in the past couple of years, has admitted that she went through she called it a nervous breakdown. So she's going through a nervous breakdown. I have two older brothers, including a brother who also is a baby. He's in diapers. We have cloth diapers. So my mom has to wash the cloth diapers. And my brother, has diarrhea all the time because he has like a problem with his digestion. And I don't know why they don't take us to the doctor. So this is going on. And so I'm just, in that first couple months of life, uh, basically little interaction, human interaction, and not good interaction. Interaction with a mom who is going through a nervous breakdown. And it was so bad, my crying, that like belly button, navel,
Mhm.
how it like heals because of the umbilical cord, it ruptured. So it broke open again and was like an open wound. It was just bleeding. So they took me to the doctor for that. And the docs there, I think maybe even had to do stitches, but it was from all the crying. So that could have been it. It could have been other things. Like my dad, I think, is narcissistic personality disorder. And he saw everybody, including his children, as an extension of himself. And so he wouldn't allow me to just, be me, just be Jamie. He wanted me to be him, and reflect on him, or that's just how he saw it. I don't even think he has the ability to see people as like separate people from himself because he never developed that ability. So either from him constantly imposing, and violating my personal boundaries and my personhood, my autonomy, he would constantly violate that over the years, or maybe it's because when I was a baby, that was kind of like the fire that triggered the cone to open and to allow the psychopathy to develop. So I think of it, sometimes people think so it's kind of like a defense mechanism. And I guess it is, but it's like a defense mechanism that's genetically programmed. It seems like I had the genetic programming for that particular defense mechanism. And once my brain kind of went down that path, started going down that path, uh, there were certain developmental stages that I didn't go through in a normal way. So, like, I didn't develop empathy. I didn't develop a very strong sense of self. I didn't kind of have a normal connection to my own emotions. but I also was kind of protected, in that those bad circumstances, uh, I didn't go crazy. You know what I'm saying? So I see it as an advantage in bad circumstances. Like let's say it's war torn when you're a child and you have to just focus all your energy on surviving and not getting in touch with your emotions or whatever else, then I think it's a benefit to you. I think it's an advantage. If you're in a situation where you don't need to spend most of your time thinking about surviving and how to get through the next day and how to protect yourself, then I think that you miss out on certain aspects of life that are very fulfilling. If you're less connected with your emotions, emotions play a very key role in people's satisfaction with life and their happiness and their sense of meaning and purpose about life. If you're just constantly on the defensive, or constantly kind of in the self-protective mode, um, you're going to survive, but you may not thrive in the ways that you could. And so I think the best thing to do is sort of be bilingual and be able to do both. It's fine to be kind of psychopathic or to be psychopathic, but also to explore some of these other aspects that psychopaths are not good at, like being in touch with your feelings, like being connected emotionally to other people, like feeling free to express yourself and to be vulnerable in the world. I think those things help enrich life. And I think that that's one thing that I hope that all psychopaths will eventually get to experience is some of those experiences, because I think that they're very desirable experiences to have in life. And I think, if you go through life without them, it's a little like going through life without eating ice cream. It's not terrible. I'm not saying, it's a mistake. I'm just saying it's better. It's better to experience both sides of it.
So um do you think it's possible for a person with psychopathy to become an empath or the other way around?
I don't think it's possible. And I think that's where, to get back to your question before, that is where the disorder probably comes from, is that I've gone through quite a bit of therapy and really tried to kind of work on shoring up some of the things that didn't naturally develop, like my connection to my emotions and my sense of self. But I still have not managed to achieve effective empathy, nor do I still can't understand moral reasoning. So I still don't have what you might call a conscience. I think that I probably never will. And so I think those two things, the moral reasoning and the lack of empathy, are probably things that you had to have done, when you were a child in order to properly program the brain. And now it's probably too late, now that I'm in my 40s, to get the brain to do that, to be able
Mhm.
to have that capacity to have the thinking, the moral reasoning, or the empathy thinking. So I don't think it's possible to have them turn into an empath, but I do think there's a he unfortunately has died, but there was a child in the United States, he was blind, and he used echolocation.
Oh
So
yeah.
he would make clicks
Mhm.
like, and then he would listen to the echoes, how it would bounce off the hard surfaces around him. And even though he was blind and they had to surgically remove his eyes because his eyes had cancer, and this is what he ended up dying of, unfortunately, is cancer, his brain was able to reprogram and to hear the echo off the surfaces. So he was able to know what surfaces were around him. He was able to bike And he was also able to play basketball. And he was good at basketball. He'd like dribble and shoot, even though he was completely blind, no eyes at all. Um, the brain is nuts. It's a crazy thing. I think, like, why was he able to do this and nobody else really? Maybe there are a couple other people who have been able to do this. I guess actually Ray Charles, the pianist and singer Ray Charles?
No.
Okay. He's old school, but he would also do a little bit of this. He said he was blind. He would wear hard shoes, and so he could hear kind of the echo, so that's how he would know if there was like an open door, for instance, because he would wear the hard shoes and could hear whether or not there was an open door in a hallway or things like that. He wasn't playing basketball. He wasn't as good as this other little boy, but I think, the brain is possible, like the brain is capable of quite a number of different things. But I think that there's another story. I actually talk about it in my book about Danny, Dani, and she was a child who didn't really have that much exposure to other human contact for, I think it was 6 years, and then she was found as a child, so in English, we call them feral children, I think. They're like wild children. They're like, uh, not raised with enough human contact, so she couldn't talk, she was still wearing diapers, and she never learned to talk. Even though she went to a family that was like this really nice family and she had brothers, she just never learned to talk. I think she could say like one word and it was dad, but it was like this. So I'm not even sure if that counts. So that's like an interesting thought is on the one hand, you have the blind boy who's able to play basketball. And on the other hand, you have the girl who was never able to talk because she never learned when she should have. And then the brain just kind of those windows of opportunity in the brain just closed, and then they could never open again. So I think that's one of the things where it is a disability in a way, but in some ways it's just like, I mean, I guess everybody's disabled in a way because none of us know echolocation except this blind boy. None of us is able to, you know, uh, play basketball with our eyes closed. Is that a disability? So that's what I mean. It is a disability, sure, because it's like they can't see. But often there are other kind of features. The brain adapts
Mm.
in ways that can help that person, in ways that somebody who doesn't have the disability, won't have. Like I would love to be able to, walk around my apartment with my eyes closed or play basketball or bike with my eyes closed, because then I could do everything like at night, no lights or whatever. But yeah, that's what I kind of mean. So for psychopaths, it's there's things that they can't do as well as normal people or can't do at all, but there are also things that they can do better. So I don't think that, to get back to your question, I don't think they'll ever be able to be empaths, but they can adapt in different ways to have similar experiences to the way that the empaths have, if they're willing to kind of learn and make those adaptations.
You described psychopathy as being a sort of defense mechanism against a trauma that happened during early childhood.
Mhm.
Do you think it can be put in place a bit later in life, or does it have its roots in childhood?
And I should say, like, it's not necessarily trauma, and it's not necessarily, yeah, probably early childhood. I just think that this is the general. I think, consensus about things that you have a genetic predisposition towards is that there has to be something that kind of triggers it, you
Mm.
know? Whatever the thing happens to be, it could be kind of just like accidental or chance. I'm not necessarily saying that somebody would have had a traumatic childhood, but there would have been something that triggered it. With me, then I think it's probably when I was a baby, or maybe because I had the narcissist dad. With other people, I've heard people say that it was, for instance, like their parents getting divorced when they were like 12. And that kind of makes sense a little bit to me because maybe especially during puberty, is another time of great change for the brain, for the body, for everything. And if something kind of disrupts that, I could see how things could get messed up. So puberty would be kind of my next guess about things. I would say if something kind of happened to you when you're 8, 9, 10, um, you know, your brain, it is going through just so much change as a child, that I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not at all an expert, in this area, but I know that there let me back up. I know for sure that we go through a window of psychological development right around 2 years old, in which, for the first time, we learn to see ourselves as separate from our mother. Before that, we don't have, really a sense of self, probably, or not a sense of self as a separate and independent being. But
Mm.
right around 2 years old is where we start to recognize ourselves in mirrors, and that's when we start understanding that we're a separate person, that it's not just us and our mother and the rest of the universe and, like all that's kind of combined together. That kind of seems funny to think because none of us remember that time. And I almost think that's probably why we don't remember that time. I have kind of a theory that we need our sense of self in order to remember things about our personal history, or at least that the sense of self helps like a lot, is basically necessary to have memories about our personal history. And I kind of think that's why most of us don't remember, like when we're 2 or when we're 1 years old. Even when we're like 5, it's hard to remember back to when you're a baby. And I wonder if that's one of the reasons. But I think that a lot of things can trigger the genetic predisposition to be a psychopath. I think it's interesting too because I talk about this in my book. My siblings, my brothers and
Mm.
sisters, had similar experiences in a lot of ways. Not as a baby, but they had the same parents, they had the same house that they were living in, they had the same basic upbringing, same basic experiences, but none of them really turned into psychopaths the way that I did. In fact, one of them turned into a very sensitive person, very vulnerable, very easily overwhelmed, very kind of fragile type person. So I think, that's an interesting, perhaps, illustration of this idea that you have to have both the genetic predisposition and the thing that triggers it, whatever that thing is. Because the trigger alone is not enough, in
Mm.
my mind, to create a psychopath. You could end up with somebody who reacts to the same, let's say, trigger in a very different way.
Okay. This inability to, this lack of conscience, do you think that now that you know that you will not achieve it, do you feel better, like a burden has been lifted, or are you, on the other hand, more, do you feel like you're lacking something?
I don't feel like I'm lacking something with the lack of conscience, and nor do I feel this way about empathy. And part of me has, and maybe it's in English, we sometimes say sour grapes is the phrase. which means that, if you're not able to have something, then you think, oh, it doesn't matter that I don't have this because you're not able to have it. And so you have to make it seem like maybe that thing's not even something you want to have. Uh, so maybe some of this is sour grapes thoughts in me, but first with empathy, I'm not even sure that it's happening. I kind of think of it as like a weird thing, and this is something I should say I've been thinking about this recently. Imagine this, you see some kid on a video who is like a small child, and they're starving wherever they're starving in Africa or whatever. And people would be like, oh, I feel so sorry for this child, right? And then would you think, Natalia, would you think, is that empathy?
Well, I think it would depend on the person.
Mm, yeah. So I imagine this, if somebody's like, "Oh yeah, I feel so badly, this starving child." And then so I'm curious for people to answer this question. You know, does the child are you feeling the feelings of the child? Because the child if they're little enough, they may not even be sad themselves about this. They may have never experienced what it was like to not be starving. So that's what makes me wonder, like, are some of these reactions that you're having, like, is it really empathy? Or are you just having your own emotional reaction to the fact that this child is starving? Because to me, it doesn't necessarily seem, because this is what people say is the definition of empathy, I think, is that, for instance, the starving baby is having an emotion, and then you also experience that same emotion with the starving baby. And I'm thinking, are you sharing that emotion with the starving baby? I'm not entirely sure that they feel the same way about it that you feel about it. And so that's what makes me wonder, is empathy really happening? Or are you just projecting the emotional reaction that you're having at seeing the starving baby, on that starving baby and thinking they must be feeling the same thing, even though they probably aren't, is my guess. They probably aren't feeling the same way that you're feeling when you watch a video with them. So that's my thoughts on empathy. My thoughts on conscience are that, why do we need moral reasoning? It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't seem rational. I can be ethical, I can choose to kind of behave in a particular way without having to feel a particular morality applied to it. Like, I don't understand the sensation of morality at all. Is it a feeling? Is it a thought? It doesn't make sense to me. I kind of don't miss it because I don't think it's necessary, and I kind of think it's stupid. I think I think, like, the morality that people feel, I believe, is often why they treat me poorly. It's their moral feelings that are telling them, "Oh, when you see Jamie, make sure to try to ruin her life," or whatever.
Mm.
That's why I don't think it's worth that much, because it just seems like the most primitive, like, uh what is it? It's like when you don't think, you instead have a reflex. So it's more like a reflex that people seem to be having, like when you hit the knee and the leg bounces up as a
Mm.
reflex, where it's like it's not you controlling it. And that's what seems weird about it, is the morality and the feelings about morality. It doesn't feel like people are in control of them. It feels like the morality feelings are in control of the people.
So instead of morality, do you like set yourself some rules that you follow? Or just, I don't know.
Right, yeah, it's a good question. So I would say that I have more of an aesthetic for certain things. Like, you probably have an aesthetic for certain types of music. whatever it is. And you don't like other types of music, right? So you have preferences that apply to things. You probably like certain types of food and don't like other types of food. Similarly, I like certain types of behavior and don't like other types of behavior. And that's kind of what it is. And I think when I was a littler baby psychopath, like in my 20s, I used to worry that if I just allowed myself to follow my preferences kind of exclusively, that I would end up just being in jail because who knows. I was like, I didn't trust myself. I thought I have enough bad inclinations that if I don't kind of try to keep myself in a cage about some of this stuff and prevent myself from doing these things and force myself to do other things, that I'll just end up going crazy. And I think that's kind of interesting. Actually, it's like in the United States, I think Americans have an interesting relationship with food about this, is that most Americans kind of think, oh, if I was to eat whatever I want, I'd be just so fat. And there's this deep distrust that Americans have about themselves and eating. And I think other people from other countries, non-Americans, are like, what's up with Americans about this? This doesn't make sense to have this sort of attitude about food, because like, what is with the kind of obsession? But I was like that as a psychopath. I was like the American who's worried about food, that worried that if I just kind of follow my own instincts, that I will, just eat everything and, get really fat and unhealthy and stuff. What I've kind of come to a place that I've come to, I guess, in my adulthood is just learning to trust my instincts, and actually learning to trust my instincts about food too, where I don't feel like I have to limit myself. And I actually think it's the trying to limit myself that used to cause the problems. And I think this is true with Americans and food, for instance, is that it's the fact that they feel like they have to diet, or like, oh no, I couldn't possibly have a piece of cake, like that would
Mhm.
be so bad, that they end up almost like depriving themselves and then fixating on the piece of cake. I think that's kind of what was happening with me, with trying to control my own behavior and put myself in a cage about things or force myself to do other things, because I started to see the off limits behavior as being very desirable just because it was off limits. And when I started just trusting my own kind of intuition and instincts about this instead, I just made like really reasonable choices. Like if I felt like, like bossing somebody up about something, they did something that bothered me, I would just boss them up. But it's not like then needed to try to ruin their life. I just bossed them up in the moment, and that felt good to me. And that was enough. But if I had deprived myself of that, then who knows? Maybe 6 months later, I would be so full of whatever, hate or disgust, that I would think to myself, I do need to ruin their life now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. So now, and this is totally different than how I used to be. Now I just do whatever I feel is consistent with who I am as a person. And before, I used to never act that way. I used to only act in a way that I thought, given the context, like given my current opportunities and or lack of opportunities, I would just choose the one that gave me what I thought was an advantage.
Mm.
And then it was like, whatever. It's like, do you know A Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge?
Yes.
What is he saving all those advantages for? What is he saving all that money for? And that's ultimately what it felt like. At first you're kind of like, okay, this is great. I'm building up all these opportunities or something. Then you start wondering for what?
Mm.
Like, what am I earning this money for? Or, these like, whatever prestige things or power things. Like, what's the point of any of this?
Mm.
These are really great questions, Natalia. You did a great job on this.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Um, how did you understand that you're a sociopath? Did you instantly see that you're different from other people, or did it take time to understand this?
Mm. So I think that I did know that I was different. I always knew that I was different. But my family was kind of different too. So do you know Mormons, the religion?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So my family's Mormon. I'm Mormon. So that's weird. Like I had a bunch of brothers and sisters, 6 children in my family, right? So that was weird. My dad was totally weird. My mom did musical theater. So she was acting and singing, and she had us all also kind of acting and singing in different plays and kind of music. So it was kind of a weird musical family a little bit. You're not going to recognize this reference, but maybe other people will kind of like the Osmond family, or like the Jackson family or something, where it's like, okay, you're kind of being raised to be a performer in like kind of a creepy way.
Mhm.
Like these children probably don't naturally want to like dance and sing like they're being made to do. So I think people were like, okay, there's something up with this family. The family is also really smart. All my siblings are smart, especially my sisters for whatever reason. It's probably because my dad's smarter than my mom, but I won't get into the genetic explanation for that. But I'll tell you just really quickly. It's because he gives X chromosomes to his daughters and he gives Y chromosomes to his sons. So he has more influence genetically over his daughters than he does his sons. Anyway, so my sisters are really smart. They're smarter than I am. My sisters are. Unfortunately, also, and this is kind of a little bit of a scandal to say. I think that do you know what postpartum depression is?
Yes.
Postpartum? Yeah. Yeah. So it runs in my family very strongly. And so my sisters who have had children, they both have had children, have experienced it quite a bit. And I think that it has had lasting consequences on the way that they interact with the world, the way that they perceive the world, maybe even has kind of, well, I think if anything kind of has an effect and it's not positive, then it's negative. So
Mhm.
it's like skewed the way that they see the world. It's kind of weird. They're so smart still, but I'm to talk to them sometimes, I'm like, wow, this postpartum stuff is nuts. Am I right? Same thing with my mom. I'm like, is this why you had a couple nervous breakdowns? Because postpartum, because both nervous breakdowns happened after she had given birth to a child. So no, it's a weird family. It's kind of weird by itself. For a while, we were poor. There were like times where a couple years where we'd be very poor. I'd be wearing like the same clothes basically every day to school. A couple times where there was food scarcity, so I wouldn't be like bringing actual food to school, but we had an orange tree. So I'd bring a bunch of oranges to eat at school. Uh, like just a really off kilter family. But even then, I knew I was different because even with my family, like there was a phrase that they came up with to describe my attitude about them sometimes, and it's scorched earth. Do you know what scorched is?
Yes.
Yeah. So if I would get kind of like mad at them or like upset during a game or whatever, it was scorched earth. And they basically kind of knew that it was just going to be bad for them for the next few hours.
Mm.
And it scorched earth, it's not even like I was yelling at them. It's not even like I showed signs of anger. It's just in every single way I could make a choice that would be kind of negative to them, I would just make it, and I had like no boundaries about that. That's kind of what scorched earth means, is that, like I don't care if the whole earth turns to dust
Mm.
because I will have my vengeance type thing. So that's what my family used to describe me as sometimes, but mostly not. It would be like if I got triggered or something. So I knew that I was particularly ruthless. I think that was like a childhood characteristic that was very pronounced, is like in any sort of game, like just totally ruthless, like totally, not thinking about the other person's feelings, like at all.
Mm.
In sports or like board games or video games or whatever else it was, any sort of interactions. And then, even in high school, I made this, like, bet with, one of my friends. I knew this boy liked me, and she had a crush on him, my friend did. And so she proposed to me, like, this bet, or maybe I'm the one that proposed it, to see who would, get him to kiss the person first. So either me or my friend, to see who he would kiss first. And I already knew that he liked me, so I was like, I will just win $10. So I thought this is a really good bet or whatever. And $10 at that time was worth more.
Mm.
But when I was telling somebody else recently this story, they're like, you didn't care about your friend's feelings or the fact that she liked the same boy or whatever, and I just had never thought of it that way, to even think about her feelings. I just thought $10. Uh and in college, I was like, my relationships are bad. I knew my relationships were bad in high school. So then I had like this kind of goal. I was like, I need to refocus. I need to like try for excellence in my friendships, not just in school and music or whatever, but also with my friendships. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to be the perfect friend. And it's kind of funny that I thought that that was like possible to do, to just kind of be the perfect friend. And I thought it was just like, it's like becoming the perfect piano player or something. You just have to practice or really want it or something. So I did that. But then, like my friendship still had problems, probably because I was manipulating them like constantly. That's almost certainly why my friendships were having problems. But, I was so invested now, which turned out to be worse, in hindsight than not being invested in the friendships. I was so invested that I was like, I need to make this work. So I did things like I read my friend's diary, her journal, to try to get like extra insight on how to be the perfect friend. So I was almost like like when people try to do something that they've never really seen before, like, do you know the Middle Ages?
Mm.
Like, yeah, like 800 AD to like 1200 or whatever. Like when they're making all the cathedrals and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, all right. Okay. So even before the cathedrals, actually, when they would draw pictures of things that they hadn't seen before and they're terrible looking, like they try to draw a picture of a camel, the artists, and it looked like a monster, that's what I felt like I was doing. I was trying to be the perfect friend, but I had no conception of what it was. So the thing that I ended up being was like a monster. It wasn't a camel at all. It was just like a monster. Uh, so I don't know. I started to think, okay, this is weird. This is definitely different. I still didn't think the word sociopath until in law school. So after university, after my first year of law school, I had this internship in like during the summer, where I tried to use my skills of a lawyer, and I had someone who shared my office, and we would talk all day long because we didn't have that much to do at this particular job. So we talk, and then she's the one that told me, "Hey, I think that you're a sociopath, or you might want to consider the possibility that you're a sociopath." So I looked it up, and this was even before Google. So I had to use something that existed before Google, like Metacrawler or something. And I found this website that had some criteria, some like a list of characteristics or a description of
Mm.
what psychopaths are. And when I read it, I thought, oh, yeah, this is me. But then I didn't really think anything of it until like it would have been 4 years later. I had lost my first job as a lawyer, and my closest friend at the time living in Los Angeles with me, she wasn't speaking to me anymore, and I had a couple romantic relationships that had ended and other problems with my friendships, and just I went from being, like, very busy to not being busy at all, to have nobody to see, nothing to do, and I thought, "Wow, this is crazy how different my life is from just, like, a month ago," and I started to realize that I had kind of a pattern of doing this, like by the end of university, I had no friends. By the end of law school, it was starting to get a little bit weird. And I thought, it seems like every few years I kind of I'll start the year by being like, "Okay, here's what I'm doing." I'm being the perfect friend, or I'm getting perfect grades, or, I'm gonna do perfectly in law school or whatever else. I'm gonna be the perfect attorney, and then have kind of this goal for myself. And after a couple years, I lose interest and I no longer want to do the thing anymore. So I self-sabotage, and um I don't put in the same amount of effort. I don't care anymore. I show up to work late. I cancel on my friends at the last minute. I just kind of do whatever I want. And it's kind of like the eating, right? It's like I force myself to be in a diet, then I get sick of it. Then I feel like I'm just going to eat cake for the next week. And so that's what I would do, because I didn't want to live a life like that, but I didn't know how else to live. I didn't know what to do instead of being on the diet or whatever. I don't even remember your question now on this one.
Um, I have another question about friendship. Do you, uh, to interact with your friends, do you try to copy empathy, or do you just let it go and be yourself?
Now I do remember your last question. It's like, how did I know I was different? I didn't really
Mm.
did know I was different, but didn't know it was called sociopath until that woman told me. With the friends, I used to copy empathy, but now think that that's manipulative. So I don't do it, but I do call something called perspective taking, or sometimes they call it cognitive empathy. And there's a phrase in English, putting yourself in the other person's shoes. So
Mm.
basically trying to imagine what would it be like for the other person. So for instance, I have a friend whose dad died recently, and she was telling me, that she had a really hard night. And so I was like, "Oh, what happened?" And she said that she had been doing something and then grabbed her phone to call her dad to tell him about it. And this is the first time that she's done something like this, where she's forgotten that her dad's dead and thought, "Okay, I'll call my dad." And even though I don't feel her sadness about that or her grief or anything like that, I can rationally think that sucks. Like that sucks a lot, because it hurts to lose a parent that you love, I'm sure. Even a parent that you don't love, in some ways it hurts even more, because you can never fix that relationship now that they're dead. You don't have the hope of fixing it. Um so that's more how I think about it. I didn't say a lot back to her. I just said like, "Oh," like, "Oh," and then I just listened. And I think that's basically all I can do. But I think actually for a lot of people, that's all they need. So I'd prefer to do that than to kind of pretend to have the empathy and be like, "Oh, that makes my heart hurt for you so much," or say some stuff like that. That's not sincere. Yeah, that's my answer.
Mm. You don't have to answer this question if it's a bit personal. I'm sorry for asking it, but what do you think about your father? Do you forgive him? Do you do you wish for a better relationship?
Um, I think we have as good of a relationship as we can have. And actually, there was a period, it was about like 9 years ago, where for whatever reason, it seemed like he did not have as many demons about his life. Like his life is really sad in a lot of ways. Like he has basically every childhood trauma, category of childhood trauma that you could have. Uh, and he too was abandoned by his mom. Uh, his situation is that his mom got pregnant with her boyfriend. Uh, Back in this time, when would this have been? Like the early 50s? There was a what we call a shotgun wedding. So they got married just to be married when the child was born, and then they got divorced. You don't know this reference maybe, but in Tijuana, which is in Mexico, I guess that was like the easiest way to get divorced back then when my dad was just a few months old. And then he never had anything to do with his dad. His dad basically abandoned him, never saw him again. And then my grandmother, her parents were like, "Well, you need to have a husband, to take care of this kid." And so they sent her back to the Mormon University, BYU. They sent her back to BYU and were like, "You need to go find a husband." So the grandparents took care of my dad during this time period, and my his grandmother was very strict and like saw him as being a bad kid because his mom was bad and he's bad and everybody's bad and they need to get punished type thing. So super strict and away from his mom. And my dad, like it's kind of sad. Like there are certain situations that have happened to him. I think probably because of his grandmother, he has like a dislike of women, like even like a kind of like hatred of women. And you think what a miserable way to live because he can't kind of control himself, especially he's a lawyer too. And when he's like around a female judge, he it's like, do you know what an intrusive thought is? Intrusive
Yes.
thought? Yeah. Like you're standing on the cliff and the intrusive thought says jump off the cliff. Yeah. So I feel like he gets these intrusive thoughts about women that are like, call her a bitch. And he listens to these thoughts sometimes. So he ends up in these terrible situations where you're like, oh my gosh, like, why did you say that to somebody? Why did you say that to that woman? And it's haunted him kind of all of his life because he didn't have the same access to like mental health care too. I have to kind of remind myself, and my therapist is like, yeah, definitely that's true. So stuff that like normally maybe I would hold people more accountable for and be like, well, you should have seen a therapist. Like they're kind of that wasn't something that was happening, when he was a child or whatever else. He'll tell like these crazy stories, like he was not able to read until he was 12 years old. And the reason he was able to read is because his stepdad, right, put him on like a crawling machine to crawl like a baby. And he was supposed to do this for like 30 minutes a day or whatever. It's kind of like, I mean, you probably don't understand this reference, but like a Nordic track, but for
Oh,
crawling. Yeah, like a ski machine for crawling. And then after like however many weeks of doing this, he was able to read. And you're like, "What?" Like, they're just and so many crazy stories, and he was, like, part of a gang, I guess, before high school, and he'd be like, yeah, every day after school, there'd be, like, this huge fight, and what he would do is he bought, like, this chain that was, like, a meter long or, like, longer, and he put a bunch of spikes in the chain, and he would just swing the chain during the fight. So he would look, I guess, pretty badass, but also so he wouldn't have to actually fight, because he had glasses and didn't wanna break his glasses. It's just, like, such a weird life. When I went to college, Natalia, he drove me my parents drove me up to college, and he was like, "Jamie, you don't have to keep being the same you. You could be a completely different person at college." And then started telling me that that's what he did at college, that when he was in high school and stuff, he was a total loser and like a social reject. But that when he was in college, he became like this cool dude. But he actually got expelled from college because he was like throwing toilets out of like sixth story window. So like very tall, throwing toilets out the window, like he taking the toilets apart from the university, and it's like he just has so many bad choices that have compounded onto bad choices that have come from this terrible way that he's grown up. I mean, just like the worst things. These are not even like this is just scratching the surface of the most terrible things that have happened to him. Things where definitely multiple people should be in prison for the things that have been done to him. And so I think with my dad, you think about stuff like personality disorders being triggered and kind of being in a way like an evolutionary defense mechanism. And I definitely think that's what was happening with him. I feel sorry for him that, he didn't just become a psychopath because I think it would have been better for him. I think that narcissism is mostly a curse, and maybe I just feel that way because that's the narcissist I know is my dad, and I see his life being cursed by it. I see that he can never really rise above a certain level because the narcissist kinda takes over and ruins it. And, I watched a movie recently, it's called The Outrun with the actress Saoirse Ronan, and she plays I guess it's a book too, and the lady who wrote the book had a dad who had bipolar disorder, and that seems really terrible too, like, as soon as he's doing well, then he's in a depressive mode, and then after the depressive mode, it's manic, and it's like, which is worse, the depressive mode for the dad or the manic mode? They're both terrible. So even though she had, like, these really traumatic experiences with her dad growing up, it's like you also recognize he's just very sick, and it's almost like when he's in these modes, he's not her dad anymore at all. There's nothing recognizable about her dad when kind of the disorder takes over. And I guess that's the way that I've just kind of come to see my dad is that, there was that time like 9 years ago where for whatever reason he was doing better. And it seemed like he didn't have many narcissistic episodes, and it seemed like he was like more free from it than he had been kind of the rest of his life, and we got along really well during that time period, and I was actually really grateful for him during that time period because there were things that I was kinda going through, and he was good about them, and it was good. It was a it's like kind of like I went back and lived with my parents for, like, a time period during that time, and I feel really grateful. It wasn't f like, even for a year, it was just for some months, and I just, am grateful to have those memories of him and to have, like, more insight into his situation. I do this, like, daily meditation, and one of them is, called "To Love the Unlovable," and the whole, like, meditation, you kinda keep bringing to mind these people you don't like, trying to see their humanity. But I feel like that I finally have achieved that with my dad, and I feel so much more peace, about it, being able to see his humanity despite all the crazy things that he's done to me and to other people that are just like terrible, some of the worst things that you could do to people. Um, so yeah, that's how I feel about my dad, I guess.
Mm. Do you think you feel that way because he's part of your family or because you understand the reason behind his actions?
I've never really thought of him as my dad. So I sort of doubt it's because he's part of my family. And in fact, we have never really called him like past like the earliest childhood. We've never called him dad. There's only like one or two of my siblings that will call him dad at all. Everybody else calls him nicknames. My favorite nickname was Mr. Poop Head. And he took it. He took it for, like, several years. That was probably when I was, like, 9 to 11 or something and kind of, like, silly. I was like, "Yeah, you're Mr. Poophead. You can respond to that." And he did. I think part of him knew that he didn't deserve to be called dad, and so he never had a problem with Mr. Poophead, and we'd short it down to, like, Poop or Poophead. You know, there was just one instance that I think is funny still. So during the summer, especially, my mom would send us off to kind of work with him. We didn't actually work. We just kind of like, I don't know, took out the trash or whatever, did little things, mostly to just get us out of the house so she didn't have so many kids in the house during the summer. But one day, my brother and I, the one that we had diapers, we were in diapers together, we went with him to go to lunch, but he had to stop by the bank, and so he stopped at the bank, he got out of the car, he started walking away. We started yelling at him to leave the car key so we could listen to music while he was in the bank. So we're yelling at him like, "Oop, leave the key," as he's, like, walking to the bank, and he's ignoring us, and we're, like, screaming louder because 'cause we're like, "Can he not hear us?" "Mr. Poophead, leave the key," screaming at him to leave the key, and then when he got back after, like, 15 minutes or whatever of being in the bank, he was like it was the only first and only time he was mad about that. He said, "Don't ever call me that in public again." But he was totally fine. Like, I think we called him that in public again, and he didn't care. It was just that one day or whatever. That's like, yeah, he wasn't kind of like, I guess without humor about himself, and that kind of, like, made it easier. Like, it was almost like they really did seem like demons, the narcissist demons, and it's too bad because now that he's a little bit older, I think he has less control over his brain in general. Just with everything, like it's harder for him to remember things. It's harder for him to stay on track and focus on something. He'll just like sometimes just sit and tell me stories and he'll be like, I know that this story has no point. So he has some self-awareness about it, which somehow I don't know. I find that to be charming. I'm like, I get that you can't tell stories anymore that anybody finds interesting. This is just a pointless story, but you still are telling it. Okay, as long as you know that that's what's happening, then I can just sit here and listen, and it's fine.
Mm. What is your relationship with the other people in your family?
I would say that it's good. I think that, they worry about me the most. Like, I
Mm.
think everybody in my family, has always kind of wondered, like, "Is Jamie gonna be okay?" So I think in some ways it's kind of a weird position to be in because I'm like the one, especially now that my parents are a little older, who will plan things and kind of like make things happen. So I am kind of like a de facto leader, if not the de facto kind of like leader in terms of at least like logistics, like getting stuff kind of in order. Um, but I think too, I didn't go to my niece's wedding and that was like a few weeks ago. And part of it's like feelings I have about my religion right now, and my niece is also Mormon, and like a Mormon wedding. So like a very religious kind of thing. And I just thought, you know what? I'm just gonna skip it. And no offense to my niece, and I'll give her a bunch of money. But I'm just gonna skip it. And I think, like, there were, like, just different kind of reactions to that. I think my sister, my niece's mom, was, like, really worried about me, and my dad said that she blamed, him at the wedding, was like, "It's your fault that Jamie's not here." Uh, I'm not sure if that's actually true. Sometimes he just makes stuff up, so it's hard to know. Uh, I think that, um I think that they have seen that the world in some ways, the world is easier for me than it is for them. In some ways, it's harder for me than it is for them. And I think part of that is it's easier for them to I saw, like, this movie trailer recently where, like, at the end, somebody says something like, "Oh, you have to understand so and so, that in this life, there are certain things that you just have to learn to ignore about this world." And I don't think I've ever been able to ignore things like even my siblings kind of can. Like, they all have, like, really normal lives, and I've never been able to find value, I guess, in just trying to blend in and have a normal life. So I think that some in a lot of ways they admire me, but they are also afraid. I think they've seen kind of what has happened, how, like, the world has treated me for being out as a psychopath and kind of being open about it. Like, I used to be a law professor, and now I'm not a law professor. I used to have other jobs that I got fired from because of it, and, it's just kind of the psychological toll too of having people treat me poorly or accuse me of things that I haven't done or, say I'm dangerous or say I'm lying or these different things. I think it's hard for my family to see me go through those things, but then I always think, in a way that I am happier because I have chosen something and just chosen it, not kind of been pushed into it a little bit by just life or society or my circumstances. So I think with them, like, would they choose their lives if they had total freedom of choice? Probably not. They've just chosen their life because, in a lot of ways, just because it's easier. It's easier to do their choices than it was to do my choices. And I think, too, the older we get, they recognize that too about me. And I think that that can be difficult because I think there's just like a little bit of jealousy about some of my life choices, but they also understand that it's still hard. It's not like uh it's not like I haven't sort of paid for those life choices. But I would say that they think of me fondly. And I think they think of me sometimes as like the one to worry about.
Um, about those remarks that you're lying and stuff like that, how do you respond to them, and how much different is it from what other people would respond?
I don't know if it would be different from other people. Well, I do know this. When my identity was, like, leaked, let's say, because I went on Dr. Phil, and then some of my students, my law students, recognized me and then complained and then, like, contacted, like, not even news agencies, like legal gossip blogs at the time or whatever. So it was like kind of a scandal, but only a scandal within like law students. But it was kind of a big scandal for law students, I think. Um, yeah, I mean, the stuff that they accused me of, so the law school had told me, that I was banned from campus, and said that I was like an immediate threat to the safety of the students and to the other faculty or whatever. And I thought, this is not true. There's nothing about this that is true. It's just prejudice and it's discrimination. It's unlawful discrimination. So I talked to an attorney, and the attorney said, how long is your teaching contract with this school? And for this particular school, I was just there on a temporary, I was a visiting professor. So I was just there for 1 year, and I only had like a few weeks left in my contract. So the attorney said, it's not worth it, Jamie, to fight this. He was like, I don't even take on cases, that aren't worth it. And it sounds like they're still going to pay you. So what are your damages? And I was like, okay, this makes sense. So there wasn't really anything I could do about that school. I mean, they just said the lies stuff, and I was like, "Okay, you've banned me. You say you're gonna, like, call the cops if I come within a kilometer of the school? Like, good luck patrolling an entire kilometer around the school." Also, I think that my apartment might have been within the kilometer. It was, like, quite close to the school, so I'm like, "You can't keep me from living." But it'd be interesting to see you try it. And also, like, what do you think is the justification for this? Like, why are you guys going so hard about this? Why are you trying to kind of make an example of me almost? Or say that you care about the health and safety of your faculty, but you don't care about me anymore? It's interesting. Like, why? Why some of these things? So, and other people too were like, kind of reacted uh, by saying, hey, like, don't ever talk to me again type stuff. And like, what you've done is shameful. And I'm like, what is the thing that I've done? Like, what is it? Like, I finally told the truth. That's what you think is shameful. You think that that's career suicide is for me to just say that I have a disability. Okay. It's like the hypocrisy of it. That I think kind of made it better. Like, I didn't, if it was I had done something bad, something terribly bad or whatever to a student, let's say, which I would never do. Uh, and then I got in trouble for it, because there are plenty of examples of people like this who get caught having done something like Harvey Weinstein, um, Jeff Epstein or whatever. Just even like normal people like, well, they're all sex crimes that I've listed so far, but I wouldn't do a sex crime, but just people who get caught after a while of doing something, even like Bernie Madoff or something, all these fraudsters who keep a secret and then finally like they get outed. That must be hard for them because they know they've done the thing. They know that they've like ripped off old people. They know that they've sexually assaulted people. They know that they've participated in like illegal sex trafficking or whatever else it is. But I didn't do anything. So I guess it was easier for me to just be like, you guys are acting crazy. What is the thing that's making you treat me so poorly? Because this is something ugly about you. It's not anything ugly about me. And I think that was like one of the things that made me think, especially like the moral reasoning of a normal person is ugly. I thought that in that moment, I was like, there's nothing good about this. There's nothing beautiful or worthwhile or or helpful, even helpful for them either, because they're acting in this very ugly way that I wonder now how many of those people regret treating me that way. The funny thing is, Natalia, what my intuition says about these people is that, for instance, that security guy who's in charge of security for the law school, who's like said all those things and banned me from campus, intuition tells me that he still thinks he's right. That the people that were like in those situations in that moment, they still think that they were right. And I think it's because they had those feelings that they were right. And they remember the feelings more than they're able to kind of think logically about it. But imagine this, like if he wasn't the one, let's say there's a new security person, and the new security person is told about this situation, and they'd be like, wow, that's crazy, we shouldn't have banned her from campus or from a kilometer of being on campus. Like we did too much there. That was discrimination. There was no indication that she was a threat to faculty or to the student body or whatever. Like that was a wrong thing that we did. Like, I think a new person could look at it in his same situation, even the same type of person, and think, "Hey, that was wrong." But I think the people at the time that made those choices, they'll never regret it. They'll never really see that that was an ugly thing. And I think it has a lot to do with their feelings, is my guess. Is that they had those feelings of being morally right, morally justified, and it's more the feelings that they acted upon than it was any thoughts or, like, facts. And so they'll never be able to see that, situation clearly. I don't know, when people now say, like, I lie and stuff, I don't read stuff about me, Natalia, that's how I avoid it. I don't read about me, and I think that's probably true of, like, everybody who has, people saying things like, "Oh, they're fat or they're ugly," like, if you're famous enough that people wanna say ugly things about you, I'm not even famous, but I there are people that who are strangers who will say ugly things about me, so whatever that means in terms of I just don't read it, so it's been, like, I don't know, like, years. Like, I think the first month that the book came out, I would sometimes read people's reviews and stuff, and sometimes people would send me stuff, and then since then, no. I just kind of let my I don't know, my actions speak for me. So there's a phrase in law that's a Latin phrase. It's called res ipsa loquitur, and it means res is the thing, loquitur speaks. So res ipsa loquitur means the thing speaks for itself.
Mm.
And that's what I really like as like an aesthetic, is that I don't need to tell people, like, "Oh, you're wrong," or whatever. Like, I can just let the thing speak for itself. I don't need commentary on it. I don't think commentary helps. If you hate the new Joker movie, you can say it, but I don't think it makes it true. It's just an opinion. Like, everybody else can watch it, and if somebody loves it, I don't think that they're wrong because you hated it. Like, I just think we don't need people, like, people think that if they say something's good or bad, that that somehow makes it more or less true, I think, the statement. And I don't think that's true. Res ipsa loquitur, the thing speaks for itself. So I almost never feel the need to, have a take about something like, oh, here's my opinion about the what Joker movie, because everybody else can just make their own judgments. Like the thing speaks for itself. You can just watch it, you can just watch my behavior. You can just listen to me talk and you can make your own judgment. I don't think it matters what anybody else thinks. Like, I don't know, like my family loves me, my girlfriend loves me. Like I have like a great professional life. I have a great personal life or very enriching musical hobby slash profession that I engage in too. And people's commentary hasn't actually mattered in the long run, even though in the short run it did matter. It did hurt me and my career prospects and financially, I guess.
You're a really strong person. I really respect you for this.
No, thank you, Natalia. Appreciate that from you.
I have a question about music. How are you able to feel it? Does it, I don't know.
Yeah. I love this question, and I think too, this is like a little bit like the blind boy who can play basketball,
Mm.
is I don't feel music at all. I think it. It's like math to me. It's like do you ever watch like these videos that kind of show the music and they show it in a visual way? You know, all like lining up or the
Oh yeah.
different things, like a video, where they've just like, oh, here's what the music looks like, you know? That's how I kind of think of it. I really like music because obviously it's in time. You can only experience it in time. And so the thing that I love most about music, you've guessed it, is messing with the time and people's perception of time. I love and that's why I majored in percussion, but now I get most of my gigs on bass, but I think that, the reason why people like my bass playing is because I play bass like a drummer, like I have like a drummer's mind playing bass, and so I think about, like, timing a lot, about how it's syncs up, about how, if I play this note, it's gonna, make people feel this way, and if I don't play that note, it's gonna make them even feel better, stuff like that. So it's kind of like this, my form of self-expression in it is just, it's probably manipulative. I think it is manipulative because I'm trying to evoke in the listener a certain sensation of their experience of time, and doing it by reordering time and kind of getting them to expect certain things about the song, the way that it's played, and then mess with their expectations. So I set up a really good, strong expectation, and then I play with that. I play with their expectation about when things will happen and how.
But isn't that normal for musicians or composers?
I would hope it is, but I think there's some people who, like, feel things. Now, do you know who Joni Mitchell is?
No.
Yeah. You can look her up maybe later. She is like a poet musician, is the way I like to kind of think of them. Do you know Bob Dylan? You've heard of him?
Yes.
Yeah, he's also like a poet musician. So some of these people are more like they've just set poetry to music, right? And I think
Mm.
for them, it's more about the language and about the words. And then there are other types of music like Afro-Cuban music. I think it's or African music in general. Most musics that derive from Africa seem to focus much more on the rhythm, on setting up the rhythm and the kind of different interactions of the rhythm. So I think there's like a spectrum. I think that some musicians, like I'm more way over here with the Africans. And then Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan are over here where it's more about the words. It's more about kind of the feel that the words give, And I love, do you know Stevie Nicks, Fleetwood Mac?
No.
I love Stevie Nicks, but she's also over here. But you know what's kind of funny? Do you understand poetry, Natalia?
Mm, yes.
I kind of don't. I don't, and it's not, I've tried to understand it. I have a hard time with non-literal stuff. So there's a famous, I think he's Irish author, James Joyce. And there's no way I could read James Joyce, I don't think, and be able to understand it. I think I did try Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. I think I did try and I couldn't understand it. I have a hard time with non-literal imagery.
Mm.
My brain likes sincerity and literalness. And if it's literal, then I have a really easy time understanding it, like math, stuff like that. If I can see something expressed in an equation, then it's easier for me to understand than if it's kind of like a soft truth is what I like to think of them as. And it's funny because even like so my oldest friend that I've had since like elementary school, she will put in her texts to me the slash s to indicate that she's being sarcastic. And that helps. That helps me to understand because sometimes I mean, I think sarcasm too plays on people's expectations and then subverts the expectation, does something different than the expectation. And for whatever reason, I I don't always pick up on that, and maybe that's why I like music too, is because I am the one setting up the expectation. And then I play with the way that I've set it up. Yeah. I don't know. It's an interesting question, Natalia, about music. I guess I agree that that's what all musicians should be doing, setting up an expectation and then subverting it. I just think with me, maybe it's more of a timing thing. They're doing that lyrically, or they're doing that with the tones, the pitches of the music that they're playing, or with the harmony. And I enjoy more the time aspect of it, like where the note hits. Sometimes what note hits when, obviously there's that, but mostly where the note hits or doesn't hit. I love to do that.
Mhm. Is it the same perception for other arts? Like, do you not feel the emotions that are connected with them and you try to understand them?
That's a really good question. I'll tell you my two favorite visual artists. One is Giotto, Giotto. And I think if you like Google Giotto and angels, like these angels, it's like during the Middle Ages, we talked about like they were bad at art, bad at drawing camels and whatever else.
Mm.
He was the first to be good at art again, to have it look realistic, look like a real situation. And I think because it's so primitive, I understand it, like kind of in the same way that if poetry is really primitive, if it's really basic, I understand it. I have an easier time understanding it. And I think that's why I like Giotto so much. But like the faces that he paints, he often is painting like Jesus and other Bible stories or whatever. So it will show, like angels being sad that Jesus is dying, and the angels are like ripping their shirt. They're like, just the anguish that these little angels have about Jesus dying is like really enjoyable for me to see. I don't know. Like, I think he just was, he had, like, simple ways of expressing himself and in ways that I feel like I understand. And then the other artist that I really like, visual artist, is Mondrian, the Dutch painter who did, like, the yellow and the blue and the red and, like, the squares and stuff.
Mm.
All right. Yeah. And I don't know why I like it. I think it's like the Dutch just kind of simplicity. Like we can just take all of nature and just distill it into just these shapes and these colors. I think again, it's like this ability to kind of simplify something, down to its core component parts, which makes it easier. It's more accessible for someone like me. Um, I think other things that I like in art though, like I don't kind of like simplicity in architecture. If anything, I like over the top in architecture because I don't know, maybe I've not learned to appreciate simplicity in architecture, but I think whenever anybody does something well and I can kind of see the proportions, for instance, like Frank Lloyd Wright, he has a house. He's an architect, and he constructed a house, the Roby House, that I used to bike past twice a day, every day to go to law school. And it's just like beautiful. It's such a beautiful house. I was just like so happy to see it every day. It was, I think those type of things make me happy too, to think, oh, somebody had like a vision in their head and they wanted to make this vision real. And even if it's not my same aesthetic, I can still appreciate it if it's really done well. Um, but other musicians I like, my favorite composer is Bach, and I feel like he too, some of his most simple pieces are even now some of his most popular ones, like the Goldberg variations, aren't very complex. They're just piano music, and you know, uh, they're not flashy at all. But he just kind of has like a certain logic in the way that he just makes choices. Like it's just very thoughtful. It's like every aspect of what he's doing is thoughtful. And I feel kind of the same way about the band Led Zeppelin, a rock band. They're my favorite modern band, where it just feels like they have a vision. And even though I think it's true that they stole a lot from other bands, that I feel like they were able to incorporate it in a better way, and that's even almost more interesting. That why were their songs so much more successful than the people that they stole from?
I have a question about what do you think of the representation of psychopaths in the media?
I think that there's kind of two things going on there. Number one is I have noticed that even people who say and do rational things a lot
Mm.
are also influenced by their emotions. Can be. Like that's pretty frequent outside of psychopaths, who mostly the only emotion that psychopaths will really get influenced by is their anger. And, I don't know, like I don't can't even remember the last time I was angry, like truly angry about something. I'm like, it's so infrequent, at least for me, but I don't experience testosterone. I imagine that would make a difference for psychopaths who do experience testosterone. I mean, I have my low levels. I guess everybody has some testosterone. But so for instance, um, there was in, I think, July, an assassination attempt on uh, former President Donald Trump, right? And after that, like people that I thought were just economists, scientists or whatever, people had such weird reactions to it. Can you guess what the reactions were, Natalia? They were just like all over the map. It was like crazy to watch it. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm surrounded by irrational people. They suddenly had like all these predictions about the future. This is World War III. The world is going to end. This is because of this or it's because of that. They just had like all these I call them spicy takes. Spicy take is like an opinion that's
Mm.
like, whoa, like World War III, that's pretty crazy, and people are just like losing their minds kind of collectively. And I see that often enough that it worries me for civilization. That is troubling to me to see that and in the people that I share a country with. Because it's like a very not based in reality kind of thing. Like none of those things turned out to be true, right? And even if they did turn out to be true, it's not like they had more insight than anybody else at that moment. It's like, what do they say? Like a broken clock is still right twice a day, right? So I always think people have like this tendency to want to um reduce the uncertainty. They don't want to live in this uncertain place of where we don't know what happened, in 9/11, or we don't know what happened with the Trump assassination
Mm.
attempt. And so that they want to kind of predict the future to give themselves, I think, an illusion of control. And I just think, hmm, it's just an illusion. And none of the stuff that you're saying matters or makes sense. I already forgot your question though. Can you help me again?
It's about psychopath representation in the media.
Oh yeah. So I think that some of the stuff about the way that media portrays psychopaths kind of comes from like this like feeling like like there's maybe an ickiness associated with things. And so it's people's kind of emotional reactions of like disgust, repulsion, that are coming out the same way that they have these emotional reactions to the Trump assassination or these other things, where they're no longer using their rational mind. They're just saying things based on the emotion of, like, oh, that bothers me. And I think the repulsion comes from probably the thought that for a lot of people, it seems like I'd be interested to see statistics about this, but I think a significant portion of the population, they associate humanity with empathy. Like those two like go hand in hand. To the extent that they if somebody doesn't have empathy, then they no longer think that that person's really human. I think is kind of the logic, the vague kind of logic that's happening in these types of situations. Um I think, and this is why I say the smart people, because I follow on Twitter very super smart people, journalists and scientists and stuff, but they all seem susceptible, most of them seem susceptible to these errors and judgment based on these emotions. And I think it's the very kind of primitive emotions of like fear, anxiety, that are most likely to do these to trigger these kind of emotional reactions, irrational emotional reactions, and even very smart people. And I think this disgust and repulsion that people feel about psychopaths is also a very comes from a very primitive place, like in the same way I have a primitive phobia of rats. Uh and I kind of know it doesn't make sense. Like, I know, like, if somebody has a pet rat, like, I could hold it, I could pet it, give it kisses or whatever. Like, I know it doesn't make sense. It's not like I'm really scared. But if I see a rat, then I'd be like, I'll have like a reflex. So a reflex is like a good way to describe it. People have a reflexive distaste or dislike for psychopaths, I think that so even people who are journalists or scientists have a prejudice. I think that's unfortunately true. Um, Step one. Step two is I think some of the depiction of psychopaths is based on just faulty data. And I think kind of what has happened here is that in certain academic um subject matter areas, there can be like amongst people who study this type of thing, there can kind of be what's called a cult of personality, where somebody, a dominant kind of personality in that field, um, has like an outsized measure of influence and even kind of control about the way that that group of researchers sees a particular situation, and even like the topics that they'll write about and the beliefs that they'll have about something. I do think that that's what's happened with psychopathy. I think that there's a Canadian researcher, Robert Hare, who was very dominant. I think he started writing in like the 70s and then got pretty dominant over the next decades because he came up with a test measure, the PCL, and then the PCLR, which is the revised, so psychopathy checklist, and then psychopathy checklist revised. And this test measurement was used in especially Canada to make determinations about whether it was safe to let somebody out of prison, to allow them to go on parole.
Mm.
And It was actually pretty effective, I think, at predicting that. But he, instead of just saying this is like a test to determine whether somebody's going to, hurt somebody when they get out of prison, it's recidivism is the
Mm,
word, to commit the crime again.
yes.
Instead of him saying that, he said it's testing for psychopathy. And I think that's the problem. That's where the
Mhm.
problem started. Because I think those are two different things. And he has not been open to criticism about that. And in fact, when people have kind of challenged him and said, "Hey, isn't this just a test about criminality and not a test about psychopathy?" Like they'd have these papers that were going to be published. Then he has sued at least once these people, or threatened to sue for defamation. So people are criticizing his test and saying, "We don't think this is about psychopaths so much as it is about criminality." And he's like, "I will sue you for defamation." So I think it's like a field in which there's not good science. There are like some fields which are like very good science. I would say physics, for the most part, seems like a pretty good science. And then there are fields of study that uh struggle, let's say. I would say anthropology has traditionally had some hard times, some struggles with some of
Mhm.
the legitimacy. And have you heard about this? That in psychology in general, there is what we say in English a replication crisis, which means that some of these studies that have come out and have said, like, I don't know, like women do this and men do that, turn out not to be true. That the we do the same experiment on different men and women and we get different results. So they don't replicate. The results don't replicate. They're not the same. And so things that we thought, oh, this is cool. Now we understand this. We don't know anymore. And I think that's applies equally, if not more so, to all the research on psychopaths, which often, because psychopaths are such a small percentage of the population, they're like maybe 1 to 4%. And we don't even have really good stats about that. 1 to 4% though is that what people kind of think. But when people do research, they don't get psychopaths and research from them for the most part. They do like the general population, and then they just test the general population, and they say the people who are more psychopathic and the people who are less psychopathic, but it's not necessarily ever psychopaths. It's just they say, okay, people who are more psychopathic do this, people that are less psychopathic do that, but they're not saying psychopaths do this. But sometimes they do say that, and that's incorrect. And so what's happening a lot in general is bad data, bad collection of data, and then bad summarization, bad kind of description of what the data says. And I would even say manipulation of data is happening, whether they realize it's happening or not. So you'll get people saying certain stats like, oh, psychopaths are responsible for this percentage of violent crime. And none of that data is good. Like all that data is just garbage. It's like cherry picked numbers, nonsense based on wrong assumptions, based on whatever. So I think, but you can talk to like even a normal psychologist, the one, I don't know, that's not really part of the cult of personality about this. And they will say those things too. They'll be like, oh yeah, psychopaths are responsible for this percentage of crime. And you're like, based on what? Can you show me? And I think they're kind of surprised. They have not, most of them, I would say, but it's changing. It is changing for the better. But most of these psychologists who study psychopaths have not really been that critical thinking about some of the work that's happened before. that they're basing their own work on. And I think some of it is because just the way that the university system works in the United States, for instance, is that in order for you to be a successful psychology professor, you
Mhm.
have to publish a certain amount of articles. And it's easier if you just kind of assume, for instance, that the definition of psychopathy is the same as what Robert Hare says, because then there's already a test that you can use. Otherwise, what are you going to use?
Mhm.
So it's more difficult. It's easier to do what we call like these incremental kind of studies and then it is to do like this whole let's like reconceptualize what it means to be a psychopath. That would be very difficult to do. I don't know that anybody in the psychology world right now has the funding or the influence necessary to do something like that, but I think eventually there will have to be something like that because I think that it's kind of like, have you heard the phrase house of cards? You try to build a
Mhm.
house with playing cards. That's a little bit like what it seems like. There's not a good foundation. The
Mhm.
it's not based on good science, and so all these other little incremental additions are just adding like another little card to the house of cards. And eventually I think it's going to collapse. So so there's that. There's I think the media representations in part are biased, but I think they're also kind of supported by the science, but the science is also biased and not sound, not good science.
So it means that in order to like live peacefully, the people need to blame someone that doesn't resemble them.
Wow. You said that, not me, Natalia. You're the one. Yeah, but I agree with you totally. I think that there's like this kind of philosophy about this, like the role of a scapegoat. And I
Mhm.
think probably even if you just like look up in Wikipedia scapegoat, you can kind of read a history of the way that humanity has often sought something external from them to blame something on and be like, this is the bad thing, not us. We're good, we need to get rid of this bad thing, then we'd be okay. You know, so an unwillingness to see that that some of the badness is coming from inside. Instead, they want to externalize it and blame something that's not them. These are great questions, Natalia. I feel like you could be a professional interviewer.
Thank you. Um, I have a last question about what do you think is the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath?
So this is like a great question to kind of follow up with from before. There might be a difference. Do you know the term agnostic?
Mhm.
Yeah, you're like, maybe there's a God, maybe there's not a God. I don't have an opinion about it. I'm agnostic about the terms. And the reason why is I haven't seen good science to
Mhm.
back it up either way. So I'm like, whatever kind of it is, I do have a little bit of an opinion about this, and it's that when I see stuff, like I think that there's two concepts, and I don't think they're necessarily the same concepts. Like sometimes people are like primary psychopathy, secondary psychopathy. I don't even necessarily agree with those two concepts because I've seen people kind of like fudge the lines. Like I don't think that's necessarily a distinction that plays out in all circumstances. I would think that there's two different types of psychopaths, though, that I think are different, and probably one of them's not a psychopath, is that there's people that are cold hearted, like I am, cold hearted. So it's like scorched earth, like my siblings, my brothers and sisters say. And then there are people that are like hot headed. The cold hearted is they're so unemotional, that so unemotional, So like not reactive, emotionally reactive at all, basically. That they're like you know, if they did something kind of mean, it would probably be because more that they didn't consider the other person. Like, you know, sometimes I am familiar with the ocean, and I have been thinking recently about like when I was a child, I would really encourage my friends to go out deeper into the ocean than they were safe to do. So I was unintentionally risking the safety of my friends, and the lifeguard would have to come or somebody else, or I'd have to like help them or they'd freak out, you know. Um, so that's kind of cold-hearted is me not caring about, you know, my friends' feelings about going deeper into the ocean. Then there's hot-headed. Right? So hot-headed would be people who have a lot of emotions, very high emotions. You know, the emotions are saying to them all sorts of things, not just anger, but also jealousy, shame, you know, disgust. Like if somebody kills like a gay person, uh, because they're gay, is that psychopathic? I would say no. In fact, I read about this guy. He got out of prison, and within just a couple days of getting out of prison, he killed his baby and his girlfriend. And I thought, there's nothing about that that I recognize as being psychopathic. But the way that things have been classified, sometimes certain classifications will group those 2 people together, those 2 types of people together. And I think if there's a distinction between sociopath and psychopath, let's say, is it about that? Because that's the place where I really see a difference. I don't understand how you could say people with like 100% emotions and people with 0% emotions in terms of like actions could be in the same category. And so that's the one distinction I would say, you know, there is. Um, but I haven't seen anything consistent about psychopath versus sociopath. Reason why I used sociopath originally is because there was a book that was popular before mine called The Sociopath Next Door. So I was like, okay, sociopath. Here's this Harvard psychology professor. She's calling it sociopath. And, you know, it made sense to me because when people say psycho, the psycho means psychotic or does it mean psychopath? I thought sociopath is kind of better because there's not that possibility for confusion. But then a few years ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was talking to a group of researchers who are British. And they told me, Jamie, we don't really use this word sociopath. We don't understand that word really to mean anything. They say that they use the word psychopath. And so I started using the word psychopath just because I thought it was more of an international word
Mhm.
that people would understand it better, that maybe it was just an American word to call it sociopath. So I don't kind of make a distinction, but I do think that there might be distinctions, but I don't necessarily think that one is born and the other one's made. I don't necessarily agree with that, for instance. It's hard to know. I think, you know, what we really should do, Natalia, is get a bunch of money and then study this with some really good science. That's what I think. I hope that will happen.
Mhm. So, do you think that the terms of psychopath and sociopath are hold a really negative connotation, and the term of antisocial personality disorder should be used more?
I don't know. Do you think that's true?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I will tell you, once when I was interviewing for a job, after I got fired from everything, after I was no longer a law professor, getting those first few jobs was really hard because people would Google me by my name and find out that I was a sociopath. So sometimes I tried to do this. I'd be like, you know what? I had noticed something. which is that if I told somebody, I'm a sociopath, they took it much better than if they found out, because they Googled it or they found out because somebody else told them.
Mm.
So I thought with these jobs, probably what's happening is that, especially during that time, Google was better. It had better results. Uh, so it was really easy to Google me and to find out about the sociopath. And I think most people, if somebody applied for a job, they would Google somebody's name at that time. So this was like in 2013. Um, yeah, 2013. The So I started telling people, like, oh, person who's interviewing me, just to tell you, just to let you know, I have antisocial personality disorder. And I thought maybe that would kind of like, make them less afraid if I was the one telling them.
Mm.
But and one time a guy did say this. He's like, "Oh, I understand. I also have like social anxiety." And I was like, "That's not it, but okay."
Mm.
But I chose antisocial personality disorder to tell them because I think you are right, probably. At least I thought it at the time that it has less stigma. Like if you were going to tell a potential employer, it's better to say that than it is to say I'm a psychopath.
Mm.
That sounds right to me. I think you're right, Natalia. But it never worked, like the people that I told about that, they never called back or whatever. It only worked to just hope that somebody wasn't going to Google me. And that's how I started getting jobs. And then I just started getting jobs based on those jobs. I did so well that people were like, "Oh, we can use you for this other thing too." And then
Mm.
there were just in fact, there's one person, so I teach paralegal classes, and that was one of my first jobs was to teach first LSAT and GMAT. So these are for law school, for business school, and then to teach paralegal classes, which are legal assistants in the United States. So those teaching jobs were some of my first jobs after the book had been published. And there was this one boss that I had who is she's going to retire soon, so she's kind of in that retirement age is the best way to describe her age, I guess. But she's also like a gay woman, and like kind of obviously a gay woman, like would wear ties and kind of have like masculine look about her a little bit. And she was like one of the first people who like actually kind of just defended me and was like, "Nope, I don't care. I'm not doing anything about this." So I had students complain even about me teaching them paralegal classes and being like, "Have you heard this terrible thing about her? She's a baddie. We need to fire her. I can't believe they have her teaching us. This is ridiculous. Our personal safety." And she was just like, "Nope, that's not a thing." And you said earlier, like, I think you said that a strong person. I really admire her strength for that. And I think there were a couple other people since her that did similar things. Some of it you just have suspicions about because you just know about it because nothing ever became a problem, even though you can see it in like the teaching evaluations that the students are saying these things kind of behind my back or whatever. Um, and I just think good for her that she was able to not make a decision based on fear and instead just make a decision based on facts, which is that there was no reason to fire me and that it seemed like the only reason that people cared at all was because I had this particular diagnosis. And that's basically the definition of prejudice and bias,
Mm.
you know, and unlawful too. And she's a lawyer. Obviously, she runs this like paralegal program. But I also wonder, is it because she's gay and she kind of grew up with some of these, prejudices? And so when it came her time to act, and to choose whether she was going to act in prejudice or whether to act, in rationality and humanity. That's what she chose. And so I'm really proud of her. I really admire her. And I'm really proud and admire all the other people who have helped me over the years, who have basically said no to prejudice. Um, and and I do agree with you, getting back to your question on nomenclature, that probably antisocial personality disorder is has less of a prejudice, but probably just because people don't know what it is. Once
Mhm.
they find out what it is, then they're like, oh yeah, let's get her fired.
Mhm. So do you think that people from minorities, for example, racial or sexual or I don't know, minorities would probably have a better opinion of psychopaths because they know what it is to be discriminated against and have prejudice?
That's a really interesting question. This is going to be kind of a long answer to it. I apologize a little bit. So when the book was coming out, I had affiliations with 3 law schools. There was the school that I was teaching at just for the year. I was a visiting professor. We already talked about them. They're in San Francisco though, and I thought San Francisco is like very progressive, very left-leaning politically, probably the most progressive left-leaning liberal place in the United States, maybe. And I thought, well, they're not going to do unlawful employment discrimination, disability discrimination, but they did, and they were the worst. They were absolutely the worst.
Mhm.
Like the most illegal, the most crazy, the most ugly, I'll just give them a shout out. Golden Gate University in San Francisco. All right. The second one is Catholic school in Texas. And my relationship to them was I was a tenure track professor, but I had already told them that I wasn't coming back for the fall because I was going to go teach at BYU, Brigham Young University, the Mormon university,
Mhm.
right? So I had these connections to 3. So I thought, well, maybe I could go back to the Catholic school. And they never suggested that. I never even asked them, but they were very nice. I don't know why they were the nicest. Maybe it's because they had no obligation to me or something. But what the dean of students or something was like, Jamie, I hope to see you very soon at conferences and stuff. I know you'll get past this. Now, I never did. I never got hired by another law school, but it was very sweet of her to say. It wasn't like mean at all. It was like very no prejudice there at all, just like good things, good feelings. And I thought, wow, okay, this is the best experience that I've had actually with this dean of students. And then at BYU, I actually didn't talk to many of them. Now they're Mormons, and Mormons traditionally in the United States have been discriminated against. Not just the United States, I bet other places. Like I've heard for sure of stories in Canada too, but Mormons were persecuted historically, like with violence often, like tarring and feathering, or there'd be like a riot, or they'd kick them out of their house and burn their houses down, or whatever. So you'd think too that the Mormons, who have been traditionally persecuted, would maybe have like a more open mind. And I'm not actually sure what happened there because I didn't hear hardly anything from them. I think I only heard from their lawyer being
Mhm.
like, Jamie, do not show up the fall. We will not let you teach. But they too, I mean, they were at least willing to pay me. They were like, there was a confidential settlement, where I was like, okay, that breaks the law. And they were like, we are willing to pay you this amount, to not have this be a big deal. I think they were just worried about the bad press. But actually, I don't know. I don't think that in general it necessarily lines up because at the Catholic school there was another teacher who was gay and Latino. So he
Mhm.
was his family's originally from Mexico. Um and he, I think, had the worst opinion of me. I think based on kind of like he was also like a dean of something. He was like the most kind of moralistic about it. He was like, Jamie is a total baddie, and like good riddance and whatever. So here's this gay Catholic Latino guy
Mm.
in which he's like a triple minority, and he had the worst opinion about me, and I think probably would have like maybe spat in my face.
So it's like if the minorities know that they're being discriminated against, they look for another scapegoat to
I
not be
don't
the best
know.
person.
I guess, right, Natalia? It makes you wonder because I've also seen this, no offense to minorities, and I'm a minority for several reasons, in certain situations. Um, but sometimes I have noticed this, that it's more about uh it's less, it's like when a minority gets control, then they act like the majority. They
Mm.
use the control to oppress others. It's not like they get into control and then they're like, okay, now we don't need any oppression. Like they use the same tactics about it. It's interesting too because I coached a high school drumline once, and it was like this, that the older, and this was before I showed up, is that the younger students had felt like they were treated poorly by the students who had just graduated. And so instead of being like, we're going to be nice to the younger students now that we're the older students, they were like, we're going to be mean because now it's our turn to be mean. Isn't that weird? Who wants it to be their turn to be mean? But that's exactly what was happening with these high school students. It freaked me out. I was like, this is ugly, very ugly to me.
It's like continuing the cycle of abuse by taking revenge.
Yeah, and especially these particular people, I feel like there it was a little bit a cult of personality. There was a particular student who was kind of like a de facto leader with this, and I would put a stop to it and be like, nope, this is not what we're doing. And then you know what they did, Natalia? They were like, this is basically, I wasn't there, but this is, I'm guessing what happened. They were like, okay, Jamie, then we will get you fired. And they did get me fired again because I'm a psychopath. So of course you can get me fired because I was like, nope, we're not going to abuse the younger students. They were like, we will get you fired, Jamie. And that's what happened. Again, though, it resulted in a settlement. So I'm like, whatever. But it's crazy. And those people though, yeah, they were totally the abused. They complained all the time. They, like, oh, last year the older students were so terrible to us, but all they wanted to do was just be terrible to the next people. They just wanted to be the ones in control, being the ones who are abusing people. That's humanity for you. That's humanity.
Well, after all that, do you find it easy to trust people?
Yes, I do. Because I just have my own personal boundaries, I guess. And I figure, like, what if they try to get me fired? Then what am I going to do? I still have rights, And that's what I did. I just got a lawyer. I was like, I can't believe you, the administration of this school, have been manipulated by these children and their parents, but that's okay. You made that choice to do the wrong thing. Like unlike my boss for the paralegal program who did the right thing, you just chose the wrong thing. And that's okay. That's your choice to make. And at least in my situation here, I will just sue you. It never even leads to even filing litigation. In all circumstances, it's just led to an out of court settlement. And then I just move on. I just move on, I guess, because it's like you give people a chance. You hope it's going to work out. If it doesn't work out, then you just move on. That's and then that process has led me to so many better things to just be like, give people a chance. If it doesn't work out, move on. It's like led me to like my girlfriend who we've been dating now almost 7 years, and she's like the love of my life. I have like the best professional situation I've had in my entire adult life. I just love it so much. It deals with so many of my passions, you know, involves my passion for music. I've had the best musical opportunities of my life. I just like this idea of like giving things a chance, and if it doesn't work out, move on, has led me to like basically everything that's great about my life. And I've never had a more happy, satisfying life experience, even though I did start experiencing perimenopause in January. And that was really rough for me because it interfered with my sleep, and my sleep really matters to me. So that was like a struggle. It's not like bad things don't still happen to me. You know, I'm getting old. That can be hard, you know, but it's just such a better way to live. And I feel like I don't resent people because if they, you know, even these people who like fire me or whatever, try to get me fired, it's like, okay, you are the one that has to live with that. You know, like I've moved on. How can you move on from that? You'd have to like apologize to me or something, track me down and apologize. You know, like you'd have to live with the fact that you have done like such an ugly thing, you know, and I've done nothing. Again, it gets back to this thing where it's like, I'm getting in trouble for doing what? I've done nothing. You're the
Mm.
one doing the ugly thing. So I guess it's like easy to still trust people, because if you don't trust people, then you don't end up with good things happening, you know? If you don't trust people, then you don't end up finding the love of your life. You don't end up in great professional situations. You don't end up in, you know, great musical situations. So still trust, because trust is necessary. But you know what, too, Natalia? This is kind of an interesting thing I've noticed about people who aren't psychopaths, is that I feel like they have a fear that I don't experience most fears anyways, maybe none, no fear, but they fear being made to look stupid, or like somebody has tricked them, or like there's like an English word, they've been duped. So like they've kind of been that they really fear um that sensation. And I think that's why people don't trust, is because even though it's necessary for every good thing to happen to them, they don't want to trust and then have the trust not rewarded, because they think that makes them look stupid. And there's something very uncomfortable about that particular feeling of looking stupid, that they're not willing to risk it. And I'm like, this is so stupid, guys. That's the stupid thing, is that you're not willing to trust. Like they don't want to look like they got taken advantage of, and I do not care.
Mm.
If I get taken advantage of or mistreated, then it's like there's a phrase in English, fool me once, shame on you.
Oh.
Yeah, fool me twice,
Mm.
the shame's on fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right?
Mm.
Uh, and that's how I feel. I feel like that's the best way to deal with it. Like I will give you the benefit of the doubt uh once, you know, and then if there's any little thing that you do where it's like clear that you won't respect my personal boundaries, or like you're not going to do what you said you were, or whatever, then I just basically am like, I'm gone. See you later. I have no bad feelings about it. I just think, you know, it's like a numbers game. You know, do I feel stupid for buying a stock, you know, like a financial stock that goes down? No, I just sell it and then buy something else. I don't feel like they've wronged me. I don't feel stupid. I know that it's a gamble. Like so much in life is just a gamble. You don't know what the future brings. That's why it's a gamble. Everything that involves the future is a risk, you know? Every person's future acts are unknowable. I could wake up tomorrow and my girlfriend could be like, I'm leaving you. I know that's true. I know that's true, and if it happens, then I'll have to deal with it, but it's not like I feel like that's what I think people maybe this fear of being, like, tricked, or they trusted something and it didn't work out. I think that's the thing that they truly fear, is the uncertainty, is that you can never know, And I think that's what leads people to say stupid things like what at the Trump assassination where they're like, it's World War III, and you're like, oh, okay. Could it just be what it is? Do we have to protect ourselves psychologically by making it about something much more than what it really is? And I notice actually this tendency in my own self. Sometimes I recognize myself too, kind of bracing, kind of like getting stiff and kind of like almost defensively against things like where I'm like, I really hope, for instance, that it doesn't rain because if it rains, oh. And I'm like, why am I putting so much emotional effort into something that's not even happening right now? Why am I so worried about this future event that I'm really hoping that something will happen a different way? Like, I think when we have that attitude about life, we tend to be more reactive. It kind of reminds me, do you snow ski at all, Natalia?
Yes,
Oh, you do
probably.
snow ski? Okay, cool. So then you'll understand this. When I ski, sometimes I will have like a tendency to like lean back, like
Mm,
it stuff it starts to get a little bit tough. And so I'll lean back a little bit, almost like I'm trying to protect myself, right? Like try to kind of put a little bit more distance between me and the bumps or whatever else is happening, the how steep the slope is. But you know what happens when you lean back, right? Which is maybe you don't know. When you lean back when you're snow skiing, there's less control. You're
mm,
less in control. So you kind of lean back to try to kind of protect yourself, but in doing that, it's worse for you. So I think about this with life too. It's so much better in skiing to keep your weight over your toes. So like not leaning so far forward, but to keep it over your toes because that weight then goes on more on the tips of your skis, which are where you're steering. So you want the weight on the edge of the ski so you can take better, more accurate, deeper turns. Right? You have more control the more you lean forward. So sometimes I feel myself in life though doing the same thing where I'm like leaning back and I'm like, oh, I can't deal with like one more thing or something. And then I think, Jamie, we have to like reset. If I'm feeling that way, then I need to lean even more forward and really try to be proactive about just kind of like not controlling things, but engaging with them as they truly are, not as I fear that they are, not as I fear that they will be, not as I fear how I'll feel about them, but just to be like really in the moment, like put all my weight over my toes and just stay there
mm.
rather than staying in the past, staying in the future, staying laterally wherever what could have been, but just to stay in that moment. And I feel like that is when I see especially non-psychopaths, psychopaths are usually good about staying in the moment, but when I see non-psychopaths do it like regularly, just kind of like they're leaning so far back on their skis. I'm like, uh-oh, do you have any sense of control? I feel like you've just like let the world kind of like take you and do what you do what you want with what it wants with you.
So do you think this way of thinking is just for you or typical of other psychopaths? Meaning that other
Mm,
non-psychopath people don't, no, meaning that they calculate the future to see what they should do or not, while you
I
live more in the present?
Yeah, I think that other psychopaths do try to predict the future, right? So they have like kind of an Excel spreadsheet of like
Mm,
data. And so they're predicting the future, but they don't have an emotional attachment to it. So it's less about predicting the future because we all kind of try to predict the future. Is it going to rain? Because if it is, then I'm not going to
mm,
go for a really long walk. For instance, because I don't want to be rained on, or maybe I do, or whatever else. It's more like the fear. the fear that it's going to rain, or the fear that this will or won't happen, whatever the thing is. I think because when you start, it's almost like you tighten up and you get so rigid about something that it's like the stress of the thing is creating more problems than the thing itself, if you understand what I mean. Like I'm worrying so much about the rain when the rain that it's worse than the problem that would be if the rain occurred anyways. You know what I'm saying?
Ah, yeah.
All right. But do psychopaths do it more or less? I think they do it less because they have less emotional attachment to outcomes and to things like what how does this reflect on me. Like psychopaths don't care. You know, they may kind of make guesses like, oh, this will reflect well on me or poorly on me, but they don't really have an emotional connection to the outcome. They can guess at the outcome and they may hope, excuse me, they may hope for a particular outcome, but they won't be like crushed, or they're not anxious about it. They're not like so emotionally invested in it that they feel fear about what will happen. They're like, whatever happens, happens kind of thing.
So it means it's easier for them to bounce back and adapt if the situation is not what they expected.
100%. Yep. I totally think that. You know, they say kind of Americans are like that in general because they had to travel from somewhere, you know, show up in a foreign land and kind of get used to adapting. Like the and even now, because it's such a big country, like you can live a totally different life in Florida than you can live in California versus Texas versus New York versus like, so they're used to kind of more change that way. And I think kind of psychopaths are like Americans in general about this, where they are not as uh, like their expectations about what will happen are not as strong. They don't have the same kind of sense of tradition or the same sense of like this is how it's always been, you know, because they've been uh do you know Rolling Stone? Just like somebody who likes to travel, they're a rolling stone. Like moss never has time to grow on them because they're constantly rolling.
Mm.
Yeah. That's like the psychopath. The psychopath is just like whatever has happened, I will bounce back. I will in fact it like I will I'll have an even better life probably in my next version.
Does this make empathy a kind of disability?
I do think that empathy probably doesn't have that much emotional, I'm sorry, individual value. Like if you're experiencing empathy, is that nice? I don't know. You know, maybe it helps you in relationships that are close to you, like your family, friends, and romantic relationships. I think empathy is more, if you thought it's beneficial at all, it's probably more beneficial on the society level, because I think it does encourage cohesion. And I think this is one thought. So, you know, that there were Homo sapiens and there were Neanderthals
Mm.
that were both living at the same time. And Neanderthals, there's some thought that the Neanderthals were actually more advanced than Homo
Mm.
sapiens. Uh, but the Homo sapiens, even though we still have Neanderthal DNA, so clearly there was intermixing, but the Homo sapiens ended up being the dominant. And so there's some question of like why, if the Neanderthals were more advanced, did Homo sapiens end up kind of winning out? And there's a thought that the Homo sapiens were more collective,
Mm.
so they had tighter social adhesion. And because of that, and this is really true about society, is that one of the most valuable things about knowing a bunch of people is somebody could have a good idea. And then you can use that good idea too. You know, they have a good idea like, oh, fire. And then once you learn about fire, it helps you too. And an idea is free. to spread, basically. And so the more kind of social adhesion that you have, the more access to good ideas that you have. And during that time period where, they didn't have houses or like that much physical property, intellectual property was the most valuable form of property to them, right? And so you can kind of see that with the social cohesion. If that's true, that social cohesion has value because ideas spread better, then it seems like empathy, which does seem associated positively with social cohesion and like better trust, people seeing other people as just as valuable as them, willing to kind of interact and kind of intermesh with people, then empathy would have like a society that experiences at least some empathy would be more valuable than a society that experiences no empathy. So I think
Mhm.
there's like a social advantage. I'm kind of like, is there individual advantage? I don't think so, but probably people that do experience it think so. I don't see it. So maybe it is kind of a disability.
Mm. And I think I finished with my questions.
Okay. Well, you did such a great job. It's such a pleasure talking with you. I don't know that what my expectations were, but this has just been like such an enjoyable time spent chatting with you. I know that my answers have been really long. I will admit that part of it is because I had an agenda because I feel like your questions were so good that I was like, you know what? I should just like take my time with the answers because I bet other people wonder these questions too. It's almost like a frequently asked questions. So instead of just answering to you, I thought I'll answer everybody else's kind of questions. So anything related to this, I'll try to kind of answer. So I appreciate your patience with that. These super long questions and being willing to have this recorded and stuff. So I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of the questions, the thoughtfulness of the follow-up questions, the insights that you've shared about your own opinions about the way things might be, just some thoughts on it. Really, really always appreciate talking to somebody who's willing to question things and increase their awareness about the way things are, about reality, about themselves, and about other people. And I especially appreciate when people are willing to try to take the time to understand me and other psychopaths. That is rarer than you think, maybe. It's like almost critically endangered that somebody would be willing to do that. So I just appreciate that about you personally, Natalia.
Mm. I'm the one that's thankful because really, thank you a lot for responding to my mail and responding to my questions because I really liked listening to your answers. You're a really nice, intelligent
Absolutely.
person.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so maybe I'll chat you later or maybe not, but I've really appreciated it and I wish you the best.
Thank you.
I'll chat you soon.